Howdy folks, and welcome to Saddle and Sixgun, your campfire for stories from the heart of the West. Are you looking for tales that resonate with the grit and glory of a bygone era? Do you appreciate a good yarn spun with a touch of wisdom and a whole heap of heart? If so, then you've come to the right place. We're here to share stories that capture the spirit of the West, tales of grit, courage, and the enduring human spirit. We invite all of you older listeners, especially those over 40, to settle in and ride along with us. You know, the older you are, the better you understand our stories. If you like what you hear, why not give us a thumbs up and subscribe? Saddle and Sixgun appreciates your support. Now, let's mosey on over to Dry Creek Junction for a story about second chances and finding hope in the most unexpected places. The sun was a real scorcher, beating down with real meanness on the southern fence line of Thorne Malri's horse ranch. That sun turned the dust into a golden shimmer above the parched ground, made the air ripple above the dry earth, like the devil's own breath. Thorne, a man of about 35, stood with his faded brown shirt soaked clean through with sweat, his worn-out boots kicked up dust with every step, resetting a crooked fence post with the kind of stubborn precision you only find in folks who've known hard times. Have you met a man like that before? You see, Thorne carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen things that most folks could barely imagine. Before settling down in Dry Creek, he'd been a battlefield surgeon, a steady hand amidst the gunsmoke and screams of men. Those experiences shaped him into the man he is. He had an eye for detail, always alert, even in moments of quiet, as if expecting trouble to come calling around the corner. His dark brown hair was cut short, nothing fancy, just a practical style befitting a man more used to doing than talking. His neatly trimmed beard, more of a close-cropped goatee, framed a jaw that was hardened by the trials of war, not to mention all the day-to-day toils and trials he's weathered. Is this the beginning of an interesting story for you? For reasons that no one in Dry Creek Junction could quite put their finger on, Thorne had left the surgeon's scalpel behind. Instead, he opened up a horse ranch on the outskirts of town, tending to thoroughbreds instead of wounds. Maybe he was tired of death. Maybe he longed for the quiet life. Whatever his reasons, here he was, hammering that post into the chalky earth, when a soft rattle of stones behind him made him pause. Plink, plink, like a pebble dropping into water, or a twig snapping, a subtle sound that only someone with sharp ears would notice. And if you want to hear more Western tales, make sure to like and subscribe to Saddle and Sixgun. He straightened up, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, and saw a figure at the edge of the fence. It was a boy, no older than 13, as thin as a rail, with clothes hanging loosely on his bony frame. Dust nearly obscured the pale skin of his cheeks, making him look like a ghost in the sunlight. His eyes, Lord, those eyes were like dark river stones, too old, too knowing, for a child's face. In his small hand, he gripped a broken-handled shovel, the metal rusted at the tip, the wood splintered near the blade. "Can I clean your barn for a plate of food?" he asked, his voice quiet. That voice wasn't pleading, wasn't broken, just flat, as if he'd long ago accepted whatever answer he was going to get. Thorne's gut tightened. He'd turned away dozens like him before, kids with hollow eyes, haunted by hunger. But there was something else in this boy's eyes, something stubborn, unyielding. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice rough as the dusty trail. "Raffin." "Can you do more than haul broken boards with that shovel?" Raffin shrugged, his shoulders thin and tired. "I'll make it work." Thorne cocked his head toward the ramshackle barn in the back pasture, its red doors faded to rust. "Back pasture," he said. "Red barn. Leave the tack alone. Don't bother the horses. You work clean, you eat." "No thank you. Get to it." Raffin turned and jogged off, moving stiffly, cautiously, as if he was saving every ounce of energy. Thorne watched him disappear, the dust kicking up at his heels. He placed the hammer neatly against a fence post. It was something he did out of habit, though he wondered if that habit made him more brave than broken, or more broken than brave. Ever wonder that yourself? Be sure to like and subscribe to Saddle and Sixgun, if you are. The ranch house lay to the east, but Raffin headed north, toward the thin line of forest. Thorne's curiosity got the better of him. He felt the pull tighten his chest. With his rifle slung across his back, he followed, his boot soles crunching over the parched soil, the dry grass snapping underfoot. Raffin moved with surprising speed, every step measured, as if he had been planning this trip for weeks. They crossed a shallow creek that had long ago dried to cracked mud, past broken boulders and sagging barbed wire, until they reached the old flour mill north of town. The mill was nothing more than a wreckage anchored to the earth, its roof collapsed like a fallen rib cage, jagged beams and rusted machinery jutting toward the sky. Canvas belts hung shredded, like ghosts draped in tatters. Nobody bothered with the place, except tonight, where Raffin slipped silently through a gap in the wall. Thorne crouched behind the wooden skeleton of a crate. Through the wreckage, he spotted movement. 3 small figures huddled in the back corner. The smallest, maybe 5 years old, lay curled beneath rough burlap, the wind whispering through the cracks in the wall and across the boards, always pressing in. Next to that child, a girl with tangled hair held a dented tin can of water, that didn't look so clean. In the center was Raffin, crouched low, offering something wrapped in torn brown paper. A charcoal sign hung nearby, ominous and simple: "We don't eat grass. Please don't chase us off." Thorne's breath caught in his chest. This wasn't just hunger. It was survival, eroded to the bone. These weren't just street urchins looking for arms, they were children who carried echoes of loss, of hunger, of fear in their skeletal frames. Raffin, rough and thin, haunted and unbroken, had led Thorne here not to beg, but to barter for hope. Thorne's heart slammed against his ribs. What a decision this man has to make. He could do 2 things: intervene, or walk away. The answer came to him quickly. He didn't step forward. He didn't say a word. He turned, his footsteps silent in his urgency, and slipped away as quietly as he'd entered. Back at the root cellar behind his house, he pulled a basket from a shelf. He loaded it with jerky, dark with salt, half a loaf of cornbread gone stale, a jar of beans, a battered tin cup, and the last of his sweet grass biscuits. Over it all, he draped a worn wool blanket, its edges frayed by time and repair. When twilight softened into night, he walked the trail to the mill once more, just as quietly as before. No words, no fanfare, he just left the basket just inside the broken wall, where the moonlight might reach. Then he turned and walked back into the darkness, into the dust, into the quiet weight of something that felt like purpose. Behind him, a tiny, timid gasp cracked through the silence. But Thorne didn't look back. The next morning, the wind came colder. Not the biting kind that cuts straight through your bones, but the sort that carries with it the whisper of change. On the northern plains of Texas, wind like that always meant something was coming. Thorne didn't say a word to anyone, he rarely did. But that morning, as dawn began to spill like pale whiskey across the hills, he packed another basket from his root cellar, this time filled with cornbread wrapped in cheesecloth, a strip of dried pork, and a jar of blackberry preserves that had sat unopened since July. He added an old blanket, faded blue, worn thin in the middle, and headed north. When he reached the flour mill, he didn't knock. He didn't call out. He simply stepped through the shattered frame of the old door and placed the basket in the quiet, filtered light. Then he turned and walked away, slow and even, never glancing back. Have you enjoyed that story so far? Now is a good time to like and subscribe to Saddle and Sixgun. Raffin found it not long after. He didn't smile. He didn't eat at first, either. He stood over the basket like a coyote eyeing a steel trap. He knew better than to trust kindness, especially when it came quietly. Still, by sunset, the blanket had been draped over the youngest child, and the preserves wiped clean from the jar. Thorne returned 2 days later. This time, he left something different: an old hammer, a length of rope, a roll of canvas, and a rusted handsaw. Not a feast, but a message: build, repair, survive. The children watched him from the shadows. On the third trip, the girl stepped out. She was small, maybe 8, with a sharp jaw and wild curls of black hair tucked behind her ears. Her clothes were threadbare but clean, her eyes bright and assessing. She didn't speak right away, just stood in the center of the broken floorboards like a ghost with unfinished business. "You're the doctor who quit," she said finally. Thorne blinked. "I was. My name's Selah." He nodded. "Thorne. You left food." "I did." "Why?" He scratched at his jaw. Didn't like the thought of kids eating dirt. She looked down, then back up. "We weren't eating dirt, just not much else." They sat in silence for a long while, the wind threading through the broken rafters above them. Somewhere behind her, Raffin shifted, always listening, always ready. "What happened to your folks?" Thorne asked gently. Selah's fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve. "There was a fire at the church. We were staying there." "A fire?" She nodded. "It started at night. People were screaming, wood cracking. I couldn't see anything, just red and smoke." She trailed off, lost in a bad memory. "Raffin found me and Tommy and pulled us out. The preacher was still inside." Thorne's brow furrowed. "He didn't make it?" Selah hesitated, then looked him in the eye. "We don't know. We never saw him again. But Tommy found something." From the far side of the room, Tommy, barely 5, crawled over slowly, his tiny hands clutching a tin box tight to his chest like a piece of his soul. He didn't speak, just opened the lid with reverence. Inside was a folded piece of cloth, a silver ring with a flattened cross engraved on it, and a tarnished Mexican coin. It was the kind used long ago by missionaries and merchants. Its surface was scratched, but the weight of it was unmistakable. The coin was real silver. Are you getting excited for the rest of the story? Consider liking and subscribing to Saddle and Sixgun to hear more stories just like this one. Thorne leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "Where'd you get these?" "From the ashes," Selah said. "After it cooled. Raffin wouldn't let me go near it, but Tommy snuck back and took it." She nodded slowly. Just one hand burned down to the bone, but the ring was still on it. Thorne felt something heavy settle behind his ribs, not just anger, not even grief, but something worse, something very familiar, recognition. He looked at Raffin, who stood with his arms folded, his jaw tight, his gaze unreadable. "You saw it, too," Thorne said. Raffin didn't move, didn't nod, but something flickered in his eyes, a memory, maybe, or a vow. Thorne stood up. His hand brushed over the boy's shoulder as he passed, but Raffin flinched, not from fear, but from something deeper, as if touch was a thing earned, not given. "I'll be back tomorrow," Thorne said. "I got more nails and some jerky." No one answered, but none of them stopped him either. Outside, the sky had turned gray, the sun fading behind clouds the color of iron. He walked back to his ranch, his boots sinking into the dirt. The wind picked up again, bringing with it the smell of ash, faint but unmistakable. That night, as Thorne sat alone with a bottle of rye, staring into the fire, he thought of 3 things: the preacher's ring, the silver coin, and a burnt hand in a sea of ruin. Something was wrong in Dry Creek Junction, not just in the past, but right now, buried beneath silence and dust. And somehow, those kids, those ghosts with ribs and hope and secrets, were the only ones left who still knew the truth. Now what is Thorne Malri going to do about it? You can find out by liking and subscribing to Saddle and Sixgun. By the week's end, Thorne Malri had made a decision that turned more heads in Dry Creek Junction than a saloon brawl on Sunday. He gave the children a place to stay. The old horse barn, long unused, its stalls empty but sound, became theirs. He patched the roof himself, laid fresh straw, and left buckets of water where the sun wouldn't reach. It wasn't much, but it was better than ash and wind. He didn't ask for thanks, and they didn't offer any, and that was fine by him. Word spread faster than a snake bite, and by the second morning, the whispers had reached the saloon, the general store, and finally, the sheriff's office. That was how it came to be that at high noon that Friday, Salinger Moat came riding slow up Thorne's Lane. The sheriff was a broad man in his 50s, thick-shouldered, with a mustache like a rusted sickle. His boots were always shined too clean for a town this dusty. When he dismounted, his spurs clinked like clock hands, ticking too loud. "Thorne," he called, his voice like gravel soaked in whiskey. Thorne stepped off his porch, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. The sun baked everything in amber. "Heard you took in some strays," Moat said. "They ain't strays," Thorne replied. "They're children." "Children with blood on them," Moat said, stepping closer. "You know what folks are saying? That preacher didn't just vanish, that those kids walked out of a burning church without a scratch, while the preacher and a whole wagon train of settlers vanished with him." Thorne's jaw tensed. "You playing the hero now, Malrich? You patching up ghosts? 'Cause if you are, you best know this, messing with those kids is messing with blood. Blood still fresh in the dirt." Thorne didn't flinch. "That a threat, Salinger?" "That's a warning," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "Let them go before Dry Creek decides to turn on you, too." He rode off slow, the dust curling in his wake like smoke from an old wound. That night, Thorne didn't sleep. He sat on the porch with his rifle leaning beside him, and watched the barn long after the moon had risen. Something stank in this town, and it wasn't just the way people turned their heads when things got hard. The next few days brought signs, small ones. Old Father Yanzi, who used to visit from El Paso, hadn't been seen since spring. The church ledger, stored in the back of the post office, had pages torn out from March. One morning, Thorne spotted muddy boot prints behind his water well, too large for children, too fresh to ignore. Someone was watching, and someone wanted this buried. Raffin had been quiet since the barn, withdrawn, guarded. He took to climbing up into the loft each night, where the shadows were the deepest. That's where Thorne found him one evening, sitting with his shovel across his knees like a soldier with a rusted rifle. "I need to show you something," Raffin said, his voice quiet. Thorne didn't ask, just nodded. The two of them slipped out past dusk, Thorne carrying his lantern low, hooded. Raffin moved like a fox in a field of traps, barely rustling the grass as they crossed into the far north of town. Beyond the graveyard, past the burned husk of the church, sat a cluster of brambles grown thick around a ring of stones, a well forgotten and dry. Thorne held the light close. "There," Raffin said. "Sela says she hears something here, sometimes at night. Wood creaking, whispers." Thorne knelt, brushing away dirt from the well's edge. The stones were old, blackened from smoke. Some cracked like bones in frost. The wind shifted, and Thorne caught a faint, sour scent beneath the dust. He dropped a stone down, and there was no splash, just a hollow clink, far too shallow for a real well. "Help me move this," he said. Wasn't that a good story so far? Be sure to like and subscribe to Saddle and Sixgun, if you thought so. Together, they pried loose the rotting planks that covered the opening. No water glistened, just earth, dry and packed. But it wasn't untouched. Thorne squinted. "Dig." They worked for nearly an hour, the soil coming up too easy, as if someone had disturbed it not long ago. A few feet down, their shovel struck something solid. Wood, a box. No, a lid. Thick oak planks burned on one side, with symbols carved along the edge, most of them scraped away. They opened it, and inside lay a shattered statue of the Virgin Mary, her face scorched, one hand missing, her body twisted and blackened. Wrapped in oilcloth beside her was a small, soft leather pouch. Raffin opened it slowly. Inside were yellowed parchment, faded ink, and words scrolled in both Spanish and English, pages of a journal. The last entries were smeared with something dark, almost black. Thorne held it to the light and read aloud, "They won't listen. They say the land is theirs now, but I saw the blood. I saw the smoke. These settlers, they were never meant to leave. I must speak out, even if it ends me." Raffen looked up, his eyes wide. "It's the preacher's journal." Thorne nodded. But before he could say more, a crack snapped through the air, a gunshot. The lantern shattered in Thorne's hand, and from the brush, a voice barked, "You never should have dug that up, boy." Midnight wore a velvet cloak over Dry Creek Junction. Stars blinked cold overhead as Thorne and Raffen crept through the scorched skeleton of the burned church. Moonlight cast sharp shadows across the broken steeple, each beam and charred post a silent reminder of the fire that had changed everything. Thorne carried a lantern, his face grim. Raffen held the old shovel, his grip tight. They approached the small, sealed stone well behind the church, a neglected thing, forgotten by most, but whispered about in fractured dreams by Sela. "Here," Raffen mouthed, pointing to the warped planks covering the opening. Thorne pulled the boards free, one splintered plank at a time, until the well yawned beneath them. No water glistened, just thick, dry earth pressed at the edges, dust motes dancing in the lantern's glow. They dropped a pebble in. No splash, just a hollow clunk. The darkness swallowed even that sound. "Dig," Thorne whispered. They took turns, the shovel biting into the soil. Is this the story you've been waiting for? Now's the time to like and subscribe to Saddle and Sixgun. After a final swing, they cleared away the debris to reveal a rectangular lid, its corners singed with soot and carvings faint around the edges. With effort, they lifted it, revealing a cavity. Inside lay a statue of the Virgin Mary carved from white stone, now mottled, her face turned earthward, one arm cracked, the other missing. Beside her, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather pouch, strained thin by time. Raffen pried it open. Thorne pulled the fragile parchment free, brittle and curled. Inked words in Spanish arched across the page, neat until the end, when they turned frantic, smeared with what looked alarmingly like dried blood. Thorne read aloud, "They bargained for silence and were given it with their guns. The migrants passed not in hope, but in fear, dug into graves when they asked only to catch their breath. I will not sign that bargain." The final line was scrawled, jagged, "I cannot stay silent." The lantern trembled in Raffen's grip. "You knew," Thorne said softly. "You were right." Raffen's silence felt like a promise. Thorne placed the journal gently back into the pouch, wrapped it in oilcloth, and tucked it close to his chest. Then, a soft thud above them, a twig snapping, the breath of movement. They froze. A voice, low and familiar, cracked the silence. "Well, Raffen, didn't expect to see you again." The planks concealed their attacker, but they weren't fast enough. A man clambered down into view, his face half-lit by the lantern's glow. He wore dusty buckskins, and across his cheek ran a pale, jagged scar. "Papa?" Raffen's voice cracked. "Don't," Thorne warned, dropping the lantern between them, sending sparks trickling across the floor. The man's gun rose without hesitation. "Hey folks, that's all the time we have for today's tale. But hold your horses, because Saddle and Sixgun is back. Before you go, partner, why not subscribe and hit that like button? It helps us keep the campfire burning and the stories flowing. We'll catch you on the next trail."